bring your skepticism, bring your doubts, bring all that you have, and we'll offer you the reason and evidence that you crave. Doubter, you're welcome in this place.
Does that answer your question?
I know. You've been to church, right? So let me answer some of your initial concerns and questions. First of all, we're not a cult. We're not here either to shoehorn you into a timeshare or to try to get you to buy used cars. What we are is a marvelously weird, humorous, and eclectic mix of people who've decided to follow Jesus Christ. This common pursuit, it binds us as close as family. And this is a family that's always got room for a few more people.
I don't care who you are.
If you're looking for a place to navigate the big questions of life, you're welcome.
It might work.
If you're interested in a Bible-based community committed to real relationships and real spiritual growth, if you want to discover the truth about God and His plan for your life, you are most welcome at Christ Fellowship at Little Annie.
1, 2. Good evening, everyone. I think we've got sound. All right. Welcome to Weird on Wednesdays once again. This is our second to last session. I will say regarding next week's session, I would suggest strongly that you make next week's session. Of all of them, I think next week will have the most bearing probably on the next few decades for us. And if you don't know anything about transhumanism, I'd say there's going to be a lot that will catch you off guard in the next decade or two if you have not discussed this with some other Christians. So let's get rolling for tonight. With our series so far, we discussed deception and discernment. We talked about lies in the culture and where those lies tend to center. We talked about artificial intelligence. A lot of that is going to come to bear in our session next week as well. UFOs and UAPs. We talked about aliens or whatever might be called aliens. We talked about abductions and missing 411. Last week we discussed the occult and secret societies and all sorts of bizarre stuff there. Tonight we're going to be talking about cryptids, not to be confused with cryptocurrency. My mother was concerned that we were going to be talking cryptocurrency tonight. I could not explain that to anyone. I have no idea what's going on there. Cryptids, however, I can talk about for a long time. So let's open up with a word of prayer, and then we'll get rolling. Our Lord and God, thank you again for the joy of just coming together with other believers and studying and thinking. Father, I want to ask again that you would open up our minds, help us to see and perceive rightly. Father, if I'm going to say anything that is wrong or incorrect, I pray that would be forgotten instantly. Lord, I just want to submit all of this to you and pray that you would give us wisdom in all things. We love you, Lord. Thank you so much for your care for us and for such a weird time in history in which we get to live. It's in your name we pray, Lord Jesus. Amen. Well, we're going to talk about cryptids tonight, and let's start by talking about living creatures. What does it mean for something to be alive? How would you define life?
Just have a gas exchange, for one thing.
Yes. Some produce more gas than others. Yes, so a gas exchange. Others? Anything else? Nothing else.
It can be killed.
What's that?
It can be killed.
Something that can be killed. Okay, so a living thing ceases to live. Is that true of all living things?
Maybe like created for purpose.
Okay, created for a purpose.
We continue to find living things in places that we don't believe that living things could possibly exist.
Right, so like, for instance, like the volcanic vents down at the basin of the ocean, like they thought there's no way anything could live at that pressure level. There's not enough heat, not enough sunlight. And then we started finding all these like 7-foot tube worms that live down there. Really fascinating. They're really, I mean, they're beautiful. They're like bright red, but they live, in these volcanic vents or around these volcanic vents. Very strange. Yeah, Bethany? Okay, active cellular activity, right? And you can just regress to your biology classes when you were dissecting what the cell was and how the cell functioned. Maybe that. Yeah, okay. Others? Anybody else want to kick in? Reproduction, what'd you say? Okay, reproduction, consuming. Yeah, there are a lot of things we often affiliate with life. I think one high school teacher I remember hearing from, or it was a college professor, I think, said you've got to have the 4 F's fighting, fleeing, feeding, and reproduction. But it's the thing is, and this is what's interesting, we don't have an actual definition for life. Did you realize that? Now, there are a lot of people who talk about the features of life, but we've never nailed down what life definitely is and life definitely isn't. So we can look at the same things we're talking about here, but let's take some of them. Cellular structure. Does that apply to angelic powers? I don't know. Reproduction doesn't apply to angelic powers, right? And these are creatures, they're created things. We would say they're living, wouldn't we? Okay. Then it gets really tricky even in our carbon-based life forms when we look at things like bacteria. What's that? Yeah, the Nephilim, and to what degree are they living versus something that is spiritual? And we'll actually dip into that a little bit tonight, actually. So you guys all familiar with what we mean by Nephilim? Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you've been watching YouTube and are all interested in Christian videos, you're probably getting inundated with giants and Nephilim stuff all the time. There's a lot of interesting things there. Okay, yeah, so defining life becomes a little bit difficult. And if we're defining life specifically by the things we see on Earth, we're probably narrowed in the field to some degree or another, right? We have detectable life on Earth. So how would you detect life on Earth? If I were to say, like, show me where life is or where we can discover life, how would you detect it? What would you look for? Water, okay. And this is one of the reasons that usually we negate the possibility of life on most other planets, is we're like, there's no stable water source or anything that stays liquid on another planet. And from all of the life that we know and understand, you have to have a water-based environment on some level, or you can't get carbon-based life. Other things that you might look for. What about temperature variations? Do you realize that on planet Earth we have a very narrow window of temperature variation? Like very narrow. And you might be like outside like last week, like, no, we don't. It's ridiculous. This is Venus right now. Not quite that bad. I think Venus is like 900 degrees, something like that, so a little bit less hospitable. But most planets and most planetary systems has this huge range of variation in temperature. And that's not always conducive to life. But sometimes life, even on planet Earth, can thrive in places where we wouldn't expect it to. The thing is if we're looking for life on planet Earth, we're generally looking for a specific thing, and it's a thing that matches us a little bit. You with me? So in other words, I'm looking for things, and I'm trying to find something that's like me or seems like me on some level. It's carbon-based life. It's something that respirates. It's something that reproduces. You know, it's something that feeds and expels, right? So you're looking for all those features. Do you know of any species that were thought to be mythical until recently? I think it was in the 1800s when they finally discovered that mountain gorillas were actually a real thing and not just something that people made up. It's like mid-1800s. They thought that people were making up the idea that they were these like giant humans that were covered in hair out in the woods. And then a bunch of safari, individuals found them and of course shot them and then inflated them with air so that they looked really big and took pictures. And they're like, oh, those things now exist. The first giant squid video was only confirmed in July 10th of 2012. Have you seen any of the videos, by the way, of giant squid? They've got a few of them. They're very few. I mean, it's not often that they catch these things. My favorite one by far, I was going to pull it up for this, but it really didn't apply, is there's one where they've got a Pacific squid on a hook underwater, and this has to be one of the most terrifying things in the world. You just see from the darkness, this thing just darts in and splays open with tentacles and grabs the thing and tries to pull it away and gets hooked on the hook, and it's Japanese and they're filming it. But I just imagine being underwater and all of a sudden just from the darkness, just this whoop, and just grabs you. Take me now, Lord. It'd be the worst. This is the okapi. You've probably seen one of these at the Cincinnati Zoo. These were thought to be long extinct or a figment of people's imagination. In 1901, they actually discovered one, and it was captured or shot, I'm not sure which, but it's a relative of the giraffe, and it looks like something that somebody would make up, doesn't it? It's like somebody mixed up a giraffe and a zebra or something. This is a blobhead fish. These were discovered for the first time last year. Man, what a weird looking animal. That thing is bizarre. It looks like a joke. Like if I had drawn that for you, or your children had drawn that for you, you'd be like, no, that can't be alive. This is a vampire hedgehog. It's a real thing. It was also discovered last year. You can see why they call it a vampire hedgehog if you look closely. But what a bizarre little animal. If you've ever looked around at the natural world, you're probably in wonder by something. I mean, you should be. You should be in wonder at some things that you see, right? If you ever looked at a giraffe and thought, what a bizarre animal, right? Or an elephant, like this animal that has a prehensile nose. It can pick up things with its nose. Like, how does that live? If you'd never seen that, and all you had seen was like life that we see generally in North America, and somebody had described an elephant to you, you'd be like, that's absurd. No such animal could possibly live, and yet they do, right? And then we wonder at things like dragons, and we think a dragon is impossible, but then we have something like an elephant in our world, right? So it is rather strange what is life and what isn't life. You know, there are approximately 15,000 new species discovered each year. 15,000. That's the average. On some high years, they're finding like 18,000. More than half of those are insects or varieties of like very tiny bugs. But that's quite a few things there, isn't it? Just to be discovering right now. Yeah, Emmy.
Are bacteria?
Not counted among those. Yeah, so bacteria, most scientists will not qualify as life right now because they don't have the same cellular DNA like respiration and structure. They have weird combinations, like they have weird survival things where this is an aside, but like they combine genetics with other bacteria and stuff. It's really weird. Like viruses do the same thing. So I don't think bacteria fits the bill on that. It's not included in that. But that's a lot of new species every year. Thus far, every species of life discovered on planet Earth are carbon-based life forms. Now, this is of interest to us because this means that like one of the big things that people like to push when they talk about how this world could have come about by chance is they'll say things like, well, sure, we have this Goldilocks scenario on planet Earth, right? Everything's just right for life. But, you know, on another planet, it could be that it's not carbon-based life, maybe it's silica-based life, which is a great idea until you go, how? Like, what does that look like? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, we have nothing like that. We've got nothing that corresponds to that, but people will often use that one in particular, because crystal has formations that are somewhat structured, and they say, well, maybe it could be that you could have silicon-based life on some planet somewhere. But so far, we haven't discovered any. Everything we see is carbon-based life, which means generally we look for the same kind of thing when we think of life forms on planet Earth. How are some creatures able to elude detection? You can't all mumble because I can't hear you.
Camouflage.
Camouflage, okay? Some creatures are just really good at hiding, like very good at hiding, right? You've ever stumbled upon something that was like really close to you, like uncomfortably close to you? We almost stepped on a baby deer out at our property last week. It was a fawn. It was just sitting next to a tree. And like literally it was like as close as the speaker is to me right now. And it jumped up and ran and about had a heart attack. What was that? But yeah, it's undiscovered areas. I mean, there are places on Earth where it's very difficult to go. The oceans, largely unexplored, largely unmapped. And the deep oceans hold some bizarre things. And probably a lot of deep lakes hold really bizarre things. Was it Lake Baikal, the one that's super deep in the former Soviet Union? Yeah, that one's got some cool, creepy stories to it. We're not going to get into those today, but those are some fun cryptids. Yeah, so other reasons that we don't detect things. So sometimes it's location, unexplored location, sometimes really good at camouflage.
Live in other realms.
Live in other realms. And this is one of the things we want to introduce and talk about tonight. The possibility that we are not the only realm, that there are things that move freely in between this realm and a different realm, or maybe other possible realms. So great concept and one that we'll kind of delve into as we get a little bit further along. Possible that some things can hide. Have you ever seen the movie Predator? You know, there was an encounter in Ohio, I don't know if you're familiar with this one, where a woman was in a tree stand hunting. So she's up there with her bow, and she's sitting up in the tree, and she said she saw something that looked like when the predator was doing like the complete invisibility form. moving from tree to tree. So she pulled out her camera, and this was back in the flip phone era, and she took a picture of it. This was in Ohio, right? Ohio, by the way, is a hub of weird cryptid stuff. And I'm not kidding. Like, when you see where we fall, it's the Appalachian Mountains and everything surrounding the Appalachian Mountains. But she tried to take a picture of it, and her husband happened to be in like a photography field. At the same time, by the way, there was some UFO encounter that happened at that a high school band all witnessed this thing hovering in the air, like this red thing hovering in the air, like just like a mile away. The picture she took was not even capable of being taken on her camera. Like, it reformatted to a smaller pixelation that wasn't even a format supported by her camera. So it's like really bizarre stuff. But like she said, it was right there in front of me. I could see something moving, and I could see that it was pretty big, and it was going from tree to tree, but I could not discern with my eyes what was happening. Really weird stuff. Interesting, the idea that some things might exist in our realm, but you can't possibly conceive of them in your head. In other words, fully possible that there might be things that are around us, but they're telling our brain no every time we try to see them. Wouldn't that be interesting? The idea that something could basically tell your brain, or that your brain was geared in such a way that your brain is not allowed to see certain things. Now, this applies to, you guys ever heard of DMT?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, all right. Was it ayahuasca is the other one? These are hallucinogenic drugs that people take. I think I might have mentioned this before in one of our previous weeks, but these are hallucinogens that people take, and many report seeing the exact same things when they take the hallucinogens, despite being very separated from one another, very separated from one another's experiences. And one of the things they talk about seeing when they trip on DMT is clockwork elves. I'll explain what that might mean as we go along in today's session. But they say they encounter these things, and they're a little bit malicious and conniving, and sometimes they're openly hostile to men and show unnatural attention to women. They're rather disturbing things, but people see them almost across the board. And many of the people who do these drugs say that their brain is never quite the same. Many people who are atheists who take this drug say, I was entirely wrong. There's definitely another realm, and there are definitely other people in that realm or other creatures that are in that realm, and it overlaps our own, and I'm certain of that now. Just interesting. That the idea that God might have put like something, a stopgap that makes you not see those. But should we presume that all creatures that appear on earth are animals akin to what we are familiar with? In other words, should we expect that every creature that exists in this realm is physical, carnal, that has a circulatory system or some cellular respiration? Should we assume that that's the case? Now, most of us do, because we're humans and we're dealing with human things and animal life, and it makes sense. But you're also a Christian, which means you also acknowledge that there is life form on some level that probably is not cellular and is probably not physical, right? God created, or through Christ, all things were created, things visible and invisible, which means there is a world that is not seen to you, but is as real or more real than this world. And there are creatures that dwell in it and are probably not made of the same material stuff that you and I are made of. When God makes all things new at the end of the age, will he be using the same matter and energy? Well, I mean, this stuff has entropy, it breaks down over time. So if he's going to make something new, it's probably not going to be with the same stuff. Interesting. By the way, this stork thing that you're seeing here, it's egret or stork or something. There have been a number of instances where when people see cryptids, the scientific community is like, you didn't really see Mothman, you saw that. Like, okay. I thought I saw a 7-foot tall man with wings, but clearly it was a stork and I was mistaken. Human history is actually riddled with stories of extraordinary creatures, monsters, fairies, other things that we might call unnatural, and we think of as totally absurd most of the time. At least in our culture, they're thought of as absurd. We generally assume these things are fictions, they're hoaxes, they're fabrications. Such assessments are probably correct most of the time. I think it's a good policy to assume that, like, if you see something out of your corner of your eye, it probably was not a pixie, right? Maybe it was a hummingbird, maybe it was a bug. But still, is it possible that there are things beyond what we normally think of as natural here in this world? What if life exists that does not play by the same rules, or whose appearance is extraordinarily rare? What if the supernatural realm has its own codex of life forms? A bestiary, if you will, of things that you have never seen nor conceived of, but they do in fact exist. Let's talk about cryptids. What is a cryptid? Are you guys familiar with the term? Okay. Some familiar with the term, some not. Can anybody describe for me what we mean by a cryptid? You can guess. I'm not going to say, like, that's a dumb answer. I mean, maybe I will. But
Something that hasn't been proved by science yet.
okay, that's a great way to describe it, right? So a creature or a supposed creature that has no scientific verification, no taxidermist has found it and like stitched it all together. We have not quantitatively put it in a test tube or any such thing. Generally, it's described this way: a creature whose existence is conjectured or rumored, it has not been scientifically verified. Said creature generally has some other evidence offered for its existence. Often it's historical accounts, folklore, anecdotal evidence, sometimes physical or residual evidence or eyewitness testimony. The vast majority of cryptid stories come from some form of eyewitness testimony. Some person claims to have seen a certain thing. So we're talking about Bigfoot and the Loveland Frog, and Mothman and the Loch Ness Monster, and all of Yetis and all of these things. That's kind of what we're going to be focusing in on this evening. What features play into your willingness to believe in cryptids? What causes you to disbelieve in cryptids? What makes you likely to believe in cryptids? Nobody's ever shot one, or if they have shot it, it didn't take. Okay? And there are stories where multiple people watch something get shot over and over again, and it doesn't drop. And it doesn't even look like it's injured. It's rather interesting. Again, that would be something not playing by our rules, right? Because when you shoot something with especially a high caliber rifle, you expect it to fall. Okay? Other things that make you inclined to believe or disbelieve.
There are unexplained places, like, for example, like the rainforest, like those areas, there may be like dinosaurs stuff.
Right. In fact, there are some cryptids speculated to exist in the Congo. I think there were many people who hunted for, it's not a brontosaurus, but it was one of the long-necked dinosaurs that they believed was in the Congo. Natives were shown like pictures of animals, and they're like, they'd shown a picture of a bear, and they're like, that's not real. Picture of a walrus, that's not real. A picture of a brontosaurus, and they're like, yeah, that's real. That lives in the swamps over here. And they asked them to draw it, and they asked them for stories about it, and they draw out pictures of it, and they tell stories about how their ancestors encountered these things and stuff. So yeah, maybe. All right. No remains. All right, and this is one of the interesting ones for me. I've had some people challenge me because this is one of those things where people were a lot of time like, well, where's the Bigfoot skeleton? It's like, that's a great point. Where's the bear skeleton? Now you could say, well, people find bear skeletons. Yeah, they do. They're kind of exceedingly rare. Think of how many birds you see on a regular basis. Where are all the bird bodies? Isn't that weird? Isn't it weird how many birds there are? And like the times you tend to see bird bodies are like when they're stuck in the front of your car, or like that's. But by and large, like shouldn't you see bodies all over the place? The problem is like a lot of these places that are conjectured, like for instance with Sasquatch, for instance, part of these places where they're conjectured to be, there's just not a lot of people. But then you have this other hypothesis that maybe it's not entirely part of our realm, which means its body might not be here, and it might not leave fur here.
Could be ate by other animals, couldn't it?
What's that?
Fall off or ate by other animals?
Yeah, I mean predation by other animals, or other animals clearing off skeletons and things like that. That kind of thing also occurs. Whale carcasses are, you see them if you're on the bottom of the ocean. They tend to fall down there and then just get devoured down there. But by and large, you don't tend to find them washed up on the beach. It happens sometimes.
Where all the cicadas go?
Yeah, where'd all yeah. I don't believe in cicadas. Those are not real. Other things that might cause you to believe or disbelieve. Maddie?
Wouldn't we have caught one? Like, I don't need
Yeah.
to be dead, but can we catch it? How have we not caught this?
Yeah, why don't we catch these things? Where's the chupacabra in a trap? We should find that somewhere, right? And to some degree or another, you think, that should be the case. Maybe these things should be get nabbed at some level or grabbed. And by the way, if most of these creatures are biological, the fact that we have no evidence of their biological remains, I think it's a decent argument. It's a good argument. Might be difficult to find in some very rare circumstances. Like I said, we're still finding creatures that we didn't even know existed, right? But, it's a decent argument. But again, what if they're not from this realm? Tom?
Back in high school,
Yeah.
typical science teacher made us calculate
Yeah.
the odds of us passing through a wall because there's spaces between
Right.
the parts. And I think I had 4 pages of equations and 5 pages of zeros and a number.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a non-zero probability that you could walk through that wall because your atomic structure is mostly empty space, and that wall's atomic structure is mostly empty space. So maybe you could pass through it. Anybody want to take a run? No? But it's a non-zero probability, which means it could be possible that something like that could happen. Yeah, Josh?
The sheer number of consistent accounts.
Okay. This is one of the major features is when something occurs over and over and over again. Sometimes that's explicable, right? Because you've got a whole lot of people who've heard the same story, and now they're telling the same story. But then sometimes it's not explicable, like when you're getting it from various different standpoints, different people, different circumstances, different time periods. Maybe you find instances of the story that are ancient and from another civilization or another culture, right? Yeah, Bethany, you were going to say? Same? Okay. Here's another one. What if you saw it? If it was your experience. I was listening to a guy talk about Opanogo. It's the sea creature that, like the giant serpent creature that's like up in one of the lakes, Lake Ontario, I think it is. I don't know if you've ever heard of this or not. They've got some really interesting, weird video evidence of this thing, like where they've got like huge wakes being created by nothing. But anyway, people speculate about, well, there was a guy telling a story about it. I was watching it earlier today. And he's telling the story. He's like, and we pulled up and we're fishing. He's a lifelong fisherman. And he's like, suddenly there was this scent of just fish, like overpowering, like nauseating stench of fish. And he said, this thing just rolled up, and he said, we turn our flashlights on it because it's dark outside. And the body, he said, was as big around as like a 45-gallon drum. And he said, so he's following the body up, and some of the Great Lakes are very clear. And he falls up to its head, and he said its head was 15 feet out of the water. And he said, as soon as my light hit its eyes were glowing bright red. And he said, we were scared, but like we didn't feel threatened. And he's like, I know you're hearing me tell you this story, and you're like, that's crazy. But there were several of us who saw it, and if you don't like that, you can kiss my. And that was his response. And his whole thing was like, I saw it. I know you don't care that I saw it. I know you think that I'm crazy, but I saw it. And this is where a lot of people are in these instances. There's some people who will recount something, and it completely destroys their life, and they still don't give up the story. Like, I know people think I'm crazy. I know people think I'm nuts. I'm not writing a book. I'm not getting rich. I'm just telling you this is what happened. Right? Some of those stories have a bit of credibility. I always question the person who wrote a book afterward. Right? There is money to be made. Maybe. All right, so what are some of the famous cryptids you guys are familiar with? Let's name some. Bigfoot, one of the first ones we think of, right? What else? Loch Ness Monster, another big one. Others? Mermaids, right? What was that? Unicorns, right? Unicorn was a living creature, by the way. Look up Siberian unicorn. It's a really cool animal. It doesn't look at all like a unicorn you're thinking of. It's like a rhinoceros with a horn that's like 10 feet long, but really bizarre ancient creature. It was Siberian unicorn. All right, others?
Frogman.
What is it?
Frogman. The Loveland Frogman.
Oh, the Loveland Frogman. First one we'll talk about tonight, actually. you have to talk about the Loveland Frogman because it's local, right? It's very close to home. And the things they're talking about are on roads you've probably driven on, right? Anything else you can think of? Yeah, I've got tons of aliens. Chupacabra, the goat suckers, right? Skinwalkers, pale crawlers. Yeah, what is it? The jackalope, right? So a puckwudgie was one of the ones I learned about this past week, but we'll talk about that. Let's talk about the Loveland frog. We're just going to roll through a few of them that are North American cryptids that have been discussed. Loveland frog is one of the earliest ones that came from this area. The report is it was a 3 to 4 foot tall bipedal frog-like humanoid with leathery skin, webbed hands and feet, and bulging eyes. A local businessman back in the 1950s first encountered 3 of these things standing around and talking with one another. Okay, 3:30 a.m. You're wondering if he just closed out a bar, right? But apparently he wasn't drunk. 1955, spotted 3 creatures standing under a bridge roadside. He said one held a wand-like device that emitted blue-white sparks and left a smell like alfalfa and almonds. That's very specific, right? The witness said he watched for like 3 minutes and then he fled the scene as these 3 wizard frogs stood under a bridge. Now again, if you're a businessman, you're a respectable person, and you saw that, would you tell anyone? By and large, most people would not. They would assume that there was something cognitively wrong with him. This man told some people. Well, years later, 1972, police officers Ray Shockey and Mark Matthews, one of them spotted what he said was a lizard that fit the description, running on the road down near the Little Miami River, jumped over a guardrail, and he lost track of it. Another police officer later shot it, threw it in the back of his car. Turned out to be an iguana with its tail cut off. And so that's what they found. But this is, of course, 2 decades after the original assessment of the Loveland frogs. You might not know this. Some video evidence exists for the Loveland frog. I'll give it to you real quickly here. Go ahead, Terry. This is just how it went.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Sunday of this color one. Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, come on and tell me I'm your own.
Just exactly how it went down. No. It did make national headlines again when Pokemon Go kind of emerged. There were some teenagers that claimed to have spotted the Loveland frog while looking for Pokemon locally in Loveland. They took a picture of something that looked like somebody holding 2 flashlights, in the river. But I think that very quickly kind of got dismissed. I'm pretty skeptical of the Loveland frog. However, it makes for a great local story. But I don't think very solid evidence. You really have the eyewitness testimony of one guy and then a couple police officers that shot an iguana. So not the best cryptid. Let's Bethany.
Curious how big this iguana was. They're like, that's the frog.
They get pretty big. So I'm guessing it was like this, and I don't know why it would be running on its hind legs. Maybe just totally unbalanced, had no control, just out of control. All right, let's talk about Bigfoot. Bigfoot is known by a number of names in North America. The same creature or some similar description of a like creature, it comes from all over in the world. I think in, what's it called in Australia? Yowie, Yeti in like the Himalayan mountains. But a number of cultures report something that sounds very much like Bigfoot. In North America, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, skunk ape is what he's called in the South, in like the swamplands in the South. In Ohio, he is known as the grass man. Did you realize that? So there's a long history of Sasquatch creatures being reported in Ohio, but they called him the grass man, which I don't know, not what I think of when I think of grass man, but what's in favor of this? Well, literally thousands of sightings reported by hikers, hunters, something like this that is a 6 foot to 10 foot biped, ape-like humanoid, something hair covered. There have definitely been a lot of frauds, but there have definitely been a lot of things that were not fraudulent, that were seen or have been captured on cameras. Right now, you are inundated with all sorts of video evidence, but now that AI is out, like, you cannot trust, I mean, I'm serious, you can't trust anything that you see anymore. Unless it came from like previous, like 2023, it's probably not even worth considering as valid. I mean, you can see a lot of Bigfoot videos right now online. Have you seen the Bigfoot video vlogs? I think Brett told me about that at first. It's all Bigfoot walking around the forest, telling stories and talking about camp life and everything. They're great. Thank you, AI. That's what the internet's for. But you do have tons and tons of accounts of this. Most descriptions contain elements of a powerful or noxious odor attached to it. That's why it's called the skunk ape in the South. Sometimes people report zero odor at all, but there are some people who say like there was a smell like death and like overpowering, like gaggingly powerful, and they smell it before they actually see the thing. But it's a very normal thing as part of that encounter to have a very noxious smell with it. Some stories are extremely elaborate and detailed. Anybody ever heard of Bob Gimlin, the Bob Gimlin Bigfoot series? YouTube, Bob Gimlin. If you want cool narrated stories, he tells pretty much every major story of Bigfoot encounter that's out there. And there are some of them that are bizarre and like interesting bizarre, like very strange. A number of the Bigfoot encounters have Bigfoot with a head that looks very much like a bald man, like just a human man, which is very strange. It's not the normal depiction you have of him, but there are a number of them out there like that. There are instances where like for instance, there was a Bigfoot that was digging up and then stowing, like burying Catholic statues. Where it was like digging them out of people's yards and then carrying them around and burying them in various places, which is pretty weird. There are instances where Bigfoot, like the Sasquatch thing, cannot come into a house. Like it's forbidden from coming into a house. So it can reach through a window and turn lights on and off, and it would do that kind of thing, but it won't actually enter a home. Like it's unable to. Which fits the bill for a lot of other like spiritual things. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But Bob Gimlin series, if you want like a super entertaining, like, hey, we're about to go to sleep, let's put on a video really quickly and watch like some weird story. Bob Gimlin, they're animated, they're a lot of fun. Okay, best evidence for Bigfoot. Firstly, I would say this, long history of historic accounts from all over the place. Native Americans were talking about Sasquatch long before the rest of the Europeans kind of came in and settled out this area. They have a very deep history with it. In fact, I think one of the Bob Gimlin series, if it's not Bob Gimlin, I think it might be Bob Gimlin, Battle of the Sasquatch, or Battle with Sasquatch, or Battle with Bigfoots. It's a great story of Native Americans getting together to go kill a whole village of Sasquatch. And like with hunting rifles, it's cool. They were stealing women and animals and butchering and eating people from these Native American tribes. And so basically several Native American tribes gathered together and went to war against this whole forest of Sasquatch. It's a very interesting story. Anyway, long history, long before modern American accounts. There are footprints. Now, I will say this, there have been a lot of fake footprints, but have any of you guys like actually deep dived on like footprint structures and some of the things they found with some of these big footprints? So there are experts on primates. They like look at these things, like look at the gait that is being used. And by the way, there have been a number of people who fabricated. Those are very easy to tell when people fabricate. But some of these Bigfoot footprints have dermal layers. Like, so you can see, like we have fingerprints, you can see the fingerprints, and they're different than ours. They like occur differently than ours would, like human footprints. So they got like dermal structures. Some of them have like where the bend and the fold comes in the foot. There are people who are like, that cannot be faked. Like you can't produce that outcome. And the way it's walking is a gait that is not human. Like if humans had put on anything and tried to make these gaits, it wouldn't work. So there are actually really good arguments from some of the footprint evidence. Some of the footprint evidence. There are a lot of fakers that are out there too. All right. Very few pieces of quality video. Most famous Bigfoot video you think of? Yeah, it's the Patterson Gimlin film, or Patterson Gimlin film, or whatever. It's the kind of famous one that was like one of the early ones. I think there's actually some others that are more interesting that have been around for a while. I'm gonna pull one that you've probably never seen before. Some of you might have if you deep dive on this, but this was filmed in 1994. And I think this is probably the best candidate for a legitimate Bigfoot film that exists. There have been a number of them since then. Almost all of them are obscured. This one is very interesting. Check this out.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, you can't hardly see it. So you see that tree behind him? That's 16 feet tall. Okay, so here, this is the same thing in slow motion. This pine tree right here, 16 feet tall. Watch the shoulders when the shoulders turn and the head when the head turns. So see how big the shoulders are? Like those shoulders are like this wide. And the head, when the head turns, is not something you would be able to articulate very well. But that is a 16-foot tall tree that he passed in front of, which makes that thing about 10 feet tall. The reason I say this is probably the best candidate, it's 1994. This is not like movie production. This dude was filming it. You saw the edge of the screen bouncing around there. That's because that was a stabilized film. So this guy's on a camcorder like we had back in the 90s, and he's trying to film this. That was stabilized. That would be really hard to fake. Could it be faked? Maybe, but the gait and the arm swing would be really hard for somebody to do back in 94. So I think that's probably a better candidate even than what you've seen with the Patterson Gimlin film.
Well, they've also talked about the gait
Yeah.
not being human
Yeah.
in any way on the videos, especially the Gimlin film.
Yeah.
They said that gait cannot be human.
Yeah, and a lot of times, some of the best features of this is when they'll take somebody and they put somebody else in the shot, the same sequence, and they try to get a human being to emulate it, especially like a big person. And when you can't like get the stride sufficient, some of these strides, by the way, are found like on mountainsides, completely like, I mean, remote to the point that nobody would have been there. Like a helicopter was flying over, saw footprints, thought a human was there. Helicopter lands, they get out, and they find these footprints that are this big that are on the side of a mountain. Right? Nobody did that to fake people out, right? That was not something that somebody did to be fraudulent. So some of that stuff is like, it's either like incredible hoaxsters, or you've got to explain it some other way. Have you guys ever heard the Sierra Sounds? The Sierra Sounds? Okay, so back in the 1970s, there's a group of hunters that were going out into like a multi-day backpacking trip into the Sierra Nevadas. They had a hunting area that they went to on the regular. So a group of, I think it was like 6 or 7 guys. And they would get out there and they would build like an elaborate fort, like with trees like this thick, just twisted together into like a giant teepee where they would stay, and then they would go out and do hunting and come back and cook food. It was like a week-long trip on horseback and stuff. So these guys are way out in the middle of the Sierra Nevadas, but they had been hearing weird sounds. I mean, bizarre stuff. And they said like Bigfoot type things. So this is in the 1970s. They recorded an audio recording of what they were hearing. Now I want you to listen for a few things. First of all, if you hear something really loud, that's them trying to make the things respond. Okay, so because they're right next to, I think like 1970s, like they had like a tape recorder or something, or I don't know, what'd you guys record on then? Reel to reel? So they're chiseling something. I was alive in the 70s, but I was pretty young. But so if you hear something really loud, like really, really loud, that's their voices. You're going to hear something that sounds like humans, like guttural human speech, okay? So it'll be stuff like, and like really weird. That's not the humans. That's whatever this thing is. And it's kind of talking like that. They've done vocal analysis of that kind of thing, and they're like, these are noises and there are tones that human beings actually can't make. Like the deepest bellow that a human being can make cannot reach the tones of lows and highs that these things are doing. Okay, so Terry, go ahead and fire it up, and it's a couple minutes, bear with it. That's a tree knox. It's very typical when Bigfoot like bangs into trees.
What are you trying to talk to this?
That's a human. That's a human.
That's right. Nothing more. We left the tracks and all that for sure.
Something's getting really weird here in just a minute.
There's two of them across the creek at the big rocks. It's a hard act to follow. You sound like he talks to us and they talk to each other. Yeah.
All right, that's good, Terry. So you can see that's pretty weird, right? And that, especially like the vocalizations that come in, like where it almost sounds like they're talking or talking with one another. Very strange stuff. Now, since that time, there have been a number of others of these that have emerged from other people who claim to have been recording them in the forest. Some others with things like that. There's a great one I heard the other day. I was going to bring it in here, but I'm not sure of the veracity of it. But it actually had a very loud belch in the middle of it. So like it's the thing's making noise like whoa, and it's like blah, just a huge belch. It's like, well, that's cool. By the way, I will tell you what I think Bigfoot is before the session's done, but we'll leave that for right now. Let's deal with the dog man. You guys ever heard of the dog man? Okay, this is one that's a little bit lesser known, but has a kind of deep history in the world. Dog man is like an individual. Think of like a traditional like werewolf, like the kind that you're seeing on the screen right here, like that version of werewolf. These have been reported throughout Michigan, like Upper Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. These have been reported a number of times. There's one particularly interesting story of a man in a semi-truck who gets chased by one of these and it reaches into his truck window to try to get him. That's how tall it was, apparently. So he said it was like 12 feet tall, which is a little bit horrifying. But anyway, interesting story there. If you want to hear some of the better renditions of what this thing is, there's something called the Bray Road Beast. It's like a documentary. There was a series of instances where these things made appearances. I think it was in Wisconsin, maybe. But a number of appearances, like day after day for a long time. Bipedal, fur-covered creature, approximately 7 feet tall, which is, again, terrifying. The idea of a canine-headed humanoid that tall. Typically either observed deep in the woods or roadside. Usually if it's roadside and eating some kind of roadkill. Most people think, I see a bear, it's a bear, and then it stands up and it's like not a bear. Like it's very clearly like canid. Numerous sightings in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Bray Road Beast, by the way, great documentary if you want to watch what happened. That's a historical account of a whole bunch of people who saw this all together. Here's the thing. These things are often seen stepping out of the air. So a lot of people who report these things say there was nothing, and then it was like a circle opened up and it stepped out of the air and walked across the road and went through another circle in the air and disappeared. It's like, what? That's strange. That's a little odd. But a number of people report that. Cynocephali is the traditional name, the dog-headed men. These have been described in cultures throughout history. Now, when I tell you this, what I'm about to tell you next, you might be astonished. This is a deep history in the world. So Greek accounts from as early as the 5th century BC account for these things and say there are whole tribes of these things that live, that they're encountered in various island territories. Herodotus, who's the father of modern history and war history, is one of the individuals who recounts these things, that they resided in eastern Libya. Egyptians, of course, describe dog-headed creatures. Some of their deities are dog-headed creatures, which should be of interest to us. They had one deity named Wepwawet, which is fun to say, Wepwawet, that was the opener of ways and walked through portals and was a dog-headed deity. Kind of interesting. Augustine discussed whether or not these things could potentially be saved. So Augustine held this as a reality in the ancient world, that there were these creatures that existed in places in the world. People talked about them all the time. And so his question was whether or not salvation existed for these hominoid creatures with dog heads. Paul the deacon in the 8th century AD recounts that they were used in the Lombard military, and they were known to drink blood and be especially strong and vicious. Okay, 8th century AD. Interesting stuff. Several other medieval travel logs and bestiaries describe them as creatures one might encounter on the road. And despite the fact that they are intelligent creatures, you have to be very careful with them because they are exceedingly dangerous. Chinese Buddhist missionary Huan Shen described an island of them east of Fusang, said that they were ferocious and dangerous. Tang historians Li Dashi and Li Yashu both describe a dog kingdom that existed somewhere off the coast of India. Here's my favorite. Saint Christopher, a saint in the Orthodox Church, was a dog-headed saint, apparently. Most of the depictions of him have him with the head of a dog. And it was accounted that he had been converted to Christianity and was a dog-headed man that served most of the rest of his life helping people cross a river because he was exceedingly strong. And so he just lived at a riverside and helped people cross a river. The depictions of this dude mostly have a dog head. Kind of interesting. Okay, so that's the canids, the dog-headed people. By the way, yeah.
Is it possible that there's a condition where people have excessive hair, that maybe they kind of thought that?
That was one of the ones that people often bring up. Is like, well, maybe they thought because you've seen the people who have often they travel with carnivals and stuff. They'll have hair that just grows out of every pore, just like the hair that's on your head, but it's growing out of every pore in their body. These specifically look like what we just saw. They describe them as dog-headed and kind of elongated, like muzzles. And apparently they can, with difficulty, according to some of the ancient historians, with difficulty they could speak human languages, but they tended to yap and that's how they communicated. They had like a more of a yappy type of language. But interesting stuff. I mean, you can toss it all out. You could be like, that's ridiculous. Or you could just go, I don't know, maybe something like that did exist or does exist. Then you have the pale crawler, or the rake. This is apparently a real picture of one. This has been making the rounds on the internet for a long time. These things I find horrifying. If you've ever done a deep dive on these things, of everything that you could possibly encounter in the woods, this is the thing I least want to ever encounter. Apparently they're extremely agile. They're pale-skinned, seemingly hairless. They're usually described as emaciated or thin humanoids, bipeds, but they usually move on all fours. They can apparently climb trees as fast as you could run. They are agile to the point that like they jump fences, and like they say that like they can keep up with cars, like they can move that fast. Sightings of these creatures are generally captured on trail cameras. Some people report, or some have been seen or reported by soldiers. Give you another really fun channel to watch. There's a channel called Wartime Stories, and it's all about things soldiers have seen in the field that, or have experienced overseas, that are like paranormal encounters that soldiers have experienced. Anyway, some recount, oftentimes it's like when they're doing training missions, like out in the woods, out in the middle of nowhere, they'll describe stuff like this. They're described, I think I've mentioned this, as extremely, extremely agile, like you couldn't possibly get away from them if one was chasing you. Some have suggested, and I think this is probably, if these things exist, if these are real, I think these are probably the base form of a skinwalker. That's my personal opinion. I think when a skinwalker is not an animal, I think it's this, a rake. Horrifying. Skinwalkers. Let's talk skinwalkers. Josh, do you have a question about the...
That's a deer.
Yeah, it is, maybe. So part of what they'll say about skinwalkers is they'll often appear as animals, but animals that don't look like what they're supposed to look like. So for instance, if you see a deer walking on its hind legs, which there are videos of this, where they're deer just like walking. The reason I put this deer on there is look at its eyes. Does that look like normal deer eyes to you? That's a little strange, right? It looks just a little bit off. Okay, so what is a skinwalker? Skinwalkers are deeply entrenched in Native American lore. The original name means something like it goes on all fours. This is part of why I attach this to a rake, or think of a rake when I think of a skinwalker, is rakes generally are moving on all fours, but they're humanoids. They look like they could have once been humans, kind of like Gollum, a little bit like that. Well, skinwalkers are apparently, at one stage of the game, were human. Generally shamanic practitioners. They were shaman or witch doctors in Native American lore who dealt in dark magics and usually made some incredible sacrifice or offering to some dark power in order to become immortal and extremely powerful. Generally, the way this is described is they say that most of these people murdered everyone they ever knew. Their closest family, everyone they knew. You'll see the reason for that in maybe a minute. But the idea was engaging in the ultimate treachery, that you were then given these dark powers or some demonic force that imbues you with power, and you cease to be human on some level, and this was the idea. The thrust of their power is some version of immortality with the ability to shapeshift, to place powerful curses on people, to mimic any sound or any noise utterly perfectly, and to have unnatural speed or power. There have been a number of instances where military people have seen something like this, like on the field. The dynamics of shapeshifting appear to be, or to require the skinwalker to actually put on an animal. And so the idea seems to be like this, they have a base form, but then if they want to be a dog, they have to kill a dog or find a dog that's dead and like wear it, right? Like possess it kind of a thing. And so a lot of people, like the Native Americans, when they describe this, they'll often describe it as the animal seems to have unnatural knowledge, like it'll get up and try to open doors of a house, or try to open a window to get into a house, or things like that. Sometimes they'll describe it as like looking in windows, like, you know, if there's an animal that's just strangely attached, like looking in windows. And sometimes they'll say that you can still see a human face somewhere on its body. So like, you think of a dog, but like when it stands up on its hind feet, there's like a human face that's like projecting out of the front and eyes that open on its chest. So really weird stuff like that. Native Americans take this very seriously. Like if you know Native American tribes or you know people who are affiliated with Native American tribes, they don't even want to talk about this. People who witness this often will talk about the skinwalkers as sort of possessing a corpse or taking control of a corpse, and they have to frequently swap those out because corpses decay. Skinwalkers are feared, hated by most Native American tribes. They are known to be violent, spiteful, and malevolent. They hate human beings. They're difficult to kill, difficult to find because they flee host bodies. And like, if you find one and you go to shoot it, it runs away and then it just leaves its body and goes and gets another body. Kind of weird. Apparently they say the only way to kill it is by saying its true name, which is why most skinwalkers have to kill their entire family and everyone who ever knew them in order to gain the power, so that nobody knows their true name. So that's the lore behind a skinwalker. We'll talk a few more, and then we gotta press on because we got a lot more to talk about. Wendigos, maybe this is the most creepy. Wendigos are horrifying. Another Native American creature. They are said to be exceedingly tall. They thrive in cold environments. They hate fire. They generally try to kill people with frostbite or get people to eat each other. And the idea is they'll sometimes possess people and get them to cannibalize one another or turn on one another. They're often described just like the rake. Sometimes they're like a rake with the antlers of a deer. This might just be a skinwalker. Might be the same thing being described. Wendigo psychosis is an actual psychosis that exists, like it's in the APA. Wendigo psychosis is when a person has this condition where they feel like they have to eat human flesh. They've got delusions of possession. They think something is inside them, controlling them. Paranoia, anxiety, hallucinations, hypersensitivity to light and sound, rapid weight loss. Sometimes they get so emaciated they look like they're like anorexic, or they have organ swelling, like it looks like they're starving to death, like a child in Africa. You know, like the pictures you've seen with like the bloated stomach, and they're aggressive. Now, when I read that list, I just say, that sounds like demon possession. Like that whole list, that just sounds like demon possession to me. But it's actually Wendigo psychosis, which makes me think, well, maybe the Wendigo is just a demon, right? Could be that is just a demonic entity. We'll just mention a few more. Jersey Devil or the Leeds Devil is kind of an interesting one. It's like a kangaroo with wings. That's the way it's generally described. Has a goat head or a horse's head, and apparently exists in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. Again, extensive reports of this thing. Let's talk about another one of our major local cryptids that is of great interest. I think this one's utterly fascinating, and again, there are a number of really great documentaries on this. This comes from southeastern Ohio.
On November 12, 1966, in Clendenin, West Virginia, 5 grave diggers claimed to have seen what they describe as a man with wings gliding over their heads. Eyewitness Kenneth Duncan later said the being was gliding through the trees and was in sight for about a minute. But it was here where Mothman became a legend. I'm at the spot of what is widely believed to be the earliest officially reported Mothman sighting, what used to be the West Virginia Ordnance Works munitions plant, better known as the TNT area. On November 15, 1966, 2 young married couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette, were driving around the TNT area when they reportedly spotted what looked like a man with large wings standing in the middle of the road. Steve described the creature as being 6 or 7 feet tall, with a 10-foot wingspan and red eyes, about 2 inches in diameter and 6 inches apart. Linda claimed she couldn't see a head or arms, but also saw glowing red eyes when the car headlights hit the figure, who seemed to shy away from the light. Frightened, they quickly sped away from the figure, but shortly after, while traveling along Route 62, they spotted it again. This time, it followed them. They claimed they couldn't shake the creature, even when the car reached speeds as fast as 100 miles an hour.
This thing apparently scratched up the top of the car. So there are claw marks all over the top of the car. There were 4 people who saw it initially. They went straight to the police station, they reported it, talked about it. And then the aftermath of that, it started appearing all over that area. Like people were seeing it all over the place. Big newspaper headlines everywhere there. Same area had a whole lot of like alien instances, like weird like alien stuff that had happened with it, and very close proximity to this. The guy who wrote, was it the Mothman Prophecies? I think was experienced in a lot of this stuff. But this is just over like in eastern Ohio. A lot of cryptid encounters occur in the Appalachian Mountains. In fact, there are places, if you want to see something cryptid, there are places in the Appalachian Mountains where apparently you can go and like a normal person on a normal day can just go stand and watch like mountain lights. Have you seen those? Where they'll have just will-o-wisp, these orbs just start appearing on the mountainside. And like, you can find videos of them all over online, and apparently you can go see these for yourself. One of the most famous cryptids in history. The story took place in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, southeastern Ohio. Mothman described as a humanoid brown tone with large eyes that glow red in the light. This happened throughout the 1960s. There was a whole bunch of reports all of a sudden. Then the bridge collapsed between Ohio and West Virginia. And like, I think like 60 some people went into the water and like 40 some people died. And apparently people had seen Mothman on the bridge just prior to that. Bridge collapsed and then never seen since. And so like went missing, and like some people will occasionally report something along those lines, but it was like this glut of experiences where people saw this thing and then it was gone, and the aftermath of that. Here's what's weird. A lot of the people that saw these things started getting visits from what we call the Men in Black. And the way they describe them is interesting. When you listen to some of their depictions, they'll say these guys showed up, they came into our house, they were pallid, so like pale, they were wearing glasses like the whole time, like sunglasses the whole time. One of the ladies recounts that, you know, his pant through the pant leg, she could see tubes going down from the guy's pant leg into his shoe, like rubber tubing. Really weird. They would hand them things like a pen, and they didn't know what to do with the pen. Like they're looking at it like, what is this? It's really bizarre stuff, but they apparently started showing up and interviewing people in the aftermath of this Mothman stuff. Really weird. But a whole lot of bizarre stuff kind of all at once. Okay, number of other ones we're not going to talk about today. Chupacabra giants, which we've got like an extensive history of here in the U.S. Ogopogo, that by the way is Ogopogo in the water apparently. I don't know if you can see that picture or not. This is apparently a Great Lakes monster. Somebody filmed this. It looks like a head that just drops down with his neck down into the deep. It's really interesting. Melonheads, which we're seeing up in Michigan, Kentucky goblins, moon-eyed people. All this stuff is just what's in North America. But there's a whole lot of other stuff in different places in the world. Okay, what do we do with all of this? What are these things? What are the options? Let's hear them, folks. Okay, demons, first thing comes to mind. I have no idea what that is. Maybe a demon. All right, other things, other options. What do you think?
Malicious, they gotta be dark or something.
Malicious, maybe, so maybe darkness on some level?
What's the stories that are malicious?
Yeah, a lot of them seem to be malicious. I recounted a lot of malicious stories. There are also bizarre stories, like there's one guy who recounts a story of being captured by Bigfoot, taken up to a family of Bigfoots, where he spent like several days with them, and they kept bringing him food, feeding him. And eventually they got into his pack and took out his tobacco and started eating his tobacco and then throwing up, and that's when he ran away. But other than that, it was just like a family of Bigfoots wanted to hang out with him. I don't know.
Heard someone
Yeah.
say freaks of nature.
Freaks of nature, okay, and that was, like for instance, the melon heads that I didn't get into. There was a story up in Michigan of all these things that looked like children with giant, like oversized heads. And they were malicious and mean-spirited and lived in the woods through the winters of Michigan. And they're like, but they were naked. They're like, what are these things? And some people suggested that maybe it was like a carnival, like a group of carnival people that got out and just were trying to survive up there. But go ahead, Sandy.
I was just reading or saw it on TV, I'm not sure. A lot of these areas where they find abandoned buildings.
Yeah.
That there were
Yeah. Yeah, and some people have suggested, yes, Sandy says maybe experiments gotten loose. Montauk Island off the coast of New York, apparently it was supposed to be experimentation of human hybrids and human animal creation or creature creation. So some of that's been speculation. They're probably the reason that Lyme disease exists, by the way. Montauk Island, check that out. They released ticks into the wild that could kill people. Anyway, others. Josh, did you have something?
Yeah, so it is my humble opinion that if angels in some way were able to create offspring, then maybe it's possible that their offspring extended more than just giants.
Yeah. So maybe like a Nephilim creation that wasn't with humans, but with some kind of animal type or animal variety. Book of Enoch, First Enoch actually recounts that as the angels had developed and created progeny with humans, that they turned their attention to animals and began creating monsters. So that's, again, old book, not necessarily canon, but pre-Jesus and where we have found it. Okay, some of these could be hoaxes. A lot of these are probably hoaxes. Right? Loveland Frog, almost certainly a hoax or hallucination. Sometimes imagination run amok. I mean, sometimes it's the case. People just imagine things. They think they're seeing things. Misidentification. It is possible. I think this is one of the things that annoys me about when people try to explain things is sometimes they're like, no, what you saw was a stork. It's like, people are not dumb. I mean, you have these scientists who are like people who are like, people just don't know what animals are. Like, they can't tell the difference between a 7-foot tall, Mothman and a stork. Which, by the way, a lot of these things, a lot of the ideas of the things that they think people are saying are just ludicrous, but could be genuine animals. It might be that some of these things are just unknown species. We've seen that there are some animals that are just really good at hiding. How often do you see foxes? That's pretty rare, isn't it? I mean, they're really good at hiding, but they're all over this area. Own chickens. You'll know how many foxes are around. Could be that there's something unnatural, something maybe supernatural. It is likely that most of these cryptids are some combination of these things. So what should be our general disposition when it comes to most cryptid stories? I think by and large, probably a little skeptical would be good, generally skeptical. But it's these last two categories I want to focus in on because I think this is where items start getting really interesting. Natural or supernatural? Is Bigfoot a primate or is Bigfoot an extra-dimensional creature? How could a person distinguish between the two? How would you know the difference between the two?
It's an alien robot.
Alien robot. Might be. Fully possible. By the way, that's one of the explanations of Bigfoot in particular. I don't know if you've heard that or not, that he is like a created creature that is made as a servitor of the Greys. But yeah, one of the options. Does the Bible claim to be an exhaustive account of all created things? No. Never claims to be that, right? There's nowhere does it claim to give definitive details about the world visible and the world invisible. What creatures do you know about from the world invisible? Can you name any? There are a few mentioned in the Bible. Cherubim, seraphim, Leviathan, Ophanim, maybe something like Behemoth, depending on what those are or what those were. But by and large, there are some creatures named there. We have no idea what they are. The tabernacle was covered with what do they call it? Rock badger skin. You know what rock badgers are? No, neither do we. That's probably dolphins. But however it got translated as rock badgers, people are like, well, I don't know what that word means. So that was just one of those words we never got translated. We understand what natural would mean. We understand what it would mean if Bigfoot were like a primate, like a chimpanzee or, a primate. What would unnatural mean? What would it mean if there were creatures that were supernatural? What are we talking about there even? Couple options. Number one, a functional angelic order. In other words, these were things created like angels that are serving some function for God. Secondly, a demoted angelic order. fallen angels who have repented and are not cast into hell and are waiting some form of judgment at the end, but are not welcomed into heaven at this stage of the game. Interesting concept. The medievals, by the way, held that about a lot of monsters. That monsters were, in fact, just fallen angels that had taken on a form where they were just awaiting judgment, and their form was part of their curse. Unclean spirits, ghosts, or demonic spirits, that is, trapped spirits. So this could mean like that they are humanoids. Think of it this way. A fallen human or an unclean spirit gets into an animal and then begins to transmogrify that animal, begins to polymorph it, change it into something else. By force of will, that animal is contorted into becoming some other creature. Interesting concept. Fourth option, a third created order of the realm invisible, intelligent beings that are preternatural. Everyone say preternatural. Does anybody know what preternatural means? Okay, it's a weird word. Preternatural means like spanning the gap between the natural and the supernatural. It is both things. It is something that is here in the natural, but also not natural. Something that's in the supernatural realm, but also touches the natural realm. Preternatural things. What do angels have charge or authority over according to the scriptures? Do you know? What kinds of things do angels oversee? What do you got? Territories, right? There are instances where angels are designated over particular territories. They are to rule over a region, or they're to rule over a people who occupy a region. This is one of the things we see God do back at the Babylon expansion, that he seems to be putting angelic powers in charge of different territories. Other things. Ministering angels. They're angels who exist to minister to Christians. So they are what we might call human-facing angels. They're all about what happens with human beings. So they might come to a church service, and they might get offended by what happens in a church service, right? Human-facing angels. Other things that angels do. How about overseeing children? The faces of their angels are constantly, they're seeing the face of my Father in heaven, or the angels are seeing the face of my Father in heaven when Jesus describes the angels overseeing children. Okay, so some of those things. There are heavenly facing watchers. There are human facing watchers. When I say watchers, do you know what I mean? Celestial powers. An angel is like a job description. Angel means messenger, but then there are celestial powers, and when they're not delivering a message, Daniel, the book of Daniel, calls them watchers, and this is the way they're described in a lot of texts. They watch. So there are watchers that face human beings. There are watchers that are in rebellion. Is it possible that there are watchers that are nature-facing watchers? What would that mean? Nature-facing watchers. They're or shepherding nature, overseeing some form of nature, taking care of something. Is it possible that God created a creature, supernatural creature, that has charge over a river or over a particular forest? I mean, we don't know that it's not possible, but it seems feasible. Yeah, Josh?
My Genesis is a little rusty. Wasn't one of Adam's job overseeing nature?
Yeah, certainly in the garden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when he was cast out, my assumption is he got fired.
Yeah, you're fired. You're fired. And off he went.
So that would require something else.
Yeah.
Right?
Some kind of agency that oversees. Yeah.
Other than Bigfoot, it seems like they're all really mean, really vicious.
Maybe.
So Bigfoot seems to be like the only one that is not.
Well, and there. So here's the other thing: the Dogman stories. There are no instances we know of where a dogman killed somebody. It's almost like they're playing by rules. There are a number of instances where you have different creatures. Do you know of one? Oh, I just saw you like.
I'm just confused because what's the difference between dog and werewolf?
They might be the same thing. A werewolf might be a skinwalker. So like again, we've got these European legends, we've got North American legends, and then we have all these histories of like cynocephaloid, these dog-headed people, right, that apparently live on some level or another. But then a lot of these instances, have you heard of a will-o-wisp? Anybody heard of will-o-the-wisp? It's like the light orbs, and you see them in swamps. The thing I was mentioning before on the mountainsides in Appalachia, you got light orbs, right? And if you've watched Skinwalker Ranch, you've seen light orbs, right? And they catch them on trail cameras. They catch them moving around. It's just a thing of light appears, moves around. Sometimes it goes through things. Really strange stuff. They might call it ball lightning. There was an amazing depiction, I think last week in Florida, where somebody's filming a cloud that just has thousands of light orbs moving around. Whether it was ball lightning or what, really weird stuff. All right, so not all of them seem to be malicious, but some of them definitely do seem to be malicious, like human haters. Like they're not big on humans at all. So we're describing a spiritual creature maybe that has been given charge over a forest, river, mountain, etc. Something that is its possession, its thing to guard, or its thing to spend time with or around. Interesting concept. What do we do with the fact that so few of these supposed encounters actually involved any form of harm? Think about like how many people claim to have seen these things and how few people like were attacked. Now there are instances where you see some of these things attack people, but very seldom. Bigfoot in particular. Bigfoot's one of those instances where you see something that apparently is much bigger than a human being, and sometimes people shoot it and nothing happens and it doesn't attack. Skinwalker Ranch. You've got something that looks like a wolf that's like way too big to be a wolf. It's like 6 foot at the shoulder. And there's an elaborate story of this thing coming over, walking over to a crowd of people looking at it as it gets closer and closer, like this thing's big. And it walked right up to one guy and they all said they felt completely unthreatened by it. And the grandfather of the family pet its head. And it like was just, you know, like tongue out, just like looking at him. He turned around and walked over to the fence, reached through the fence, grabbed the calf, and started ripping the calf out of the pen and dragging it away. And so they start shooting it, and they shoot it, and they shoot it, and they shoot it, and they go back and get a bigger gun, and they keep shooting it. And they're hearing the thud, and it's just like not doing anything. And finally it like looks back at him and is like, all right, and it just left. Like, what was that? But again, it didn't attack the person. Almost like it's operating according to a rule set, like that it's not allowed to harm human beings or something. What, if anything, does this have to do with the Fey realm or UFOs? Let's talk about fairies. Oh boy. Not the Elton John kind, the kind that you see in nature. Here's the thing. When you start deep diving into a lot of these, stories, you're going to see details that emerge that, again, people are embarrassed to talk about because they think it makes them sound crazy. So they'll say things like this. Sometimes I saw Bigfoot, but Bigfoot was carrying an orb of light in one hand, or he had a staff, right? And he was running through the forest and there were lights surrounding him or flying around him, but that sounds crazy. So I'm just going to tell them the part about the primate. Or I saw him walk through a door in midair. Like this gap just opened up in the air and then he stepped into it and he disappeared. Like the Bray Road Beast has a number of encounters of things like going in and out of portals. But people don't say that because they're like, I can talk about a werewolf, but if I talk about a werewolf walking into the air, that sounds crazy, right? That's where you cross the line. But the thing is when you start listening to these stories and you start thinking about the stories that have been told throughout human history about the Fey realm, they're telling the same story. You're talking about creatures that oftentimes don't obey physical laws in the same way, that seem to be sometimes capricious and malicious toward human beings, and sometimes indifferent to human beings, and sometimes nice to human beings. Some people like to minimize those particular stories and don't talk about the weird nature of the things they're saying. Let's talk about the traditional understanding of Fae or fairies. And you might be thinking, is Ben really advocating that we believe in fairies? You don't have to believe this if you don't want, but I find this fascinating. I think I know what Bigfoot is. I think Bigfoot's a troll. And I'm not kidding. I really think Bigfoot fits the natural paradigm of a troll from the Fey realm. The story of Beowulf and Grendel, I think Grendel was a Sasquatch. I think Grendel was a troll. I think they're the same thing. Let's introduce some Fey creatures. Nixies, pixies, brownies, sprites, elves, gnomes, leprechauns, banshees, will-o'-the-wisp, the wild hunt, trolls, selkies, Puckwudgies, merfolk. All right, let's just talk briefly about what some of these things are. They are great band names. Puckwudgie is super fun to say. Nixies are like when you think of the typical, like the fairy, the humanoid with wings flying. Nixies are water-based. Nixies are things that dwell in waters. They typically oversee a pool or a river or a lake. They'll sometimes drown people, not because they're mean, but because they forget. And so they might draw a person into the water and let them breathe water for a little while, and then they forget that the person is there, and they let the person drown. Sometimes they beckon people into water and call people into water. They're like the siren. The typical version of a siren is a Nixie. Pixies are the small, like bug-sized humanoids with wings. What's that? Tinkerbell. All right. The Irish and the English are very serious about these things. Like to this day, if you talk to people who are from Ireland or England, and who particularly who live out in the country, they're big about certain rules. Like you stay away from the old oaks. And if an oak is ancient and old, you got to stay away from that because there are creatures that surround that kind of a thing, and you got to be careful not to offend those things. It's been a long time since a lot of people recognize these things as real, but out in the wilderness in England, now this is not an American thing. Like you don't hear anything about this in America, but it's a big deal in England. Sprites are other like small humanoid types. Elves are what. Again, we just talked aliens a few weeks ago. Do you remember the tall whites? When you looked at the pictures of tall whites, what was the first thing you think of? Like Lord of the Rings elves. I mean, that's what they look like, right? By the way, fairies, the term comes from the fair folk, meaning the very pretty people. All right? And the fair folk were those people who lived in the Fey realm or the fair realm. They're from another dimension. They can enter this one. And elves are chief among them. The elves are the foremost among them. They're tall, beautiful people that sometimes offer you wisdom. Sometimes they think you're really stupid and they treat you like you're really stupid. And do you know what people see when they're on DMT? Clockwork elves. Most of them will describe it like leprechauns or gnomes. Isn't that weird? Like they're seeing into another realm. Gnomes you know about, they stand in their little statues with beards and hats. Now gnomes are supposed to be things that like live in caves, and they forge things, they make things. Banshees are often what we might describe as ghosts. They're like unsettled, evil, or unholy spirits, but they're considered among the Fey realm. Will-o'-the-wisp, they're the light orbs that fly around. Those things are legit. Like everything else that's on this list, if you're like, Ben, does that exist? I'd be like, no. There is something out there that is a will-o'-wisp, a light orb, and they appear often, and they get photographed often, and people can sit and watch them occur. I've seen this stuff. So I'll tell you, those things I think are 100% real from my personal experience. But the rest of this I haven't seen. The Wild Hunt is apparently a group of spirits that just race around the woods, apparently hunting things, and they sound like elves. Trolls, think about how trolls have been described in ancient history. What are trolls? They're typically dull, they're stupid on some degree or another. They communicate, but they're kind of rough, very strong, very dangerous. They sometimes live under bridges or isolation. Just listen to that, I'm like, that's a Sasquatch. Selkies, I can't remember what selkies are. Do any of you know? Yeah, I think they're like water, like serpents or some kind of water dwelling thing. Puckwudgies are American folklore. They're little like gray creatures that turn into porcupines and have quills. But apparently in the Northeast it was a thing, right? Merfolk, all that other stuff. Now, looking at this list, there are a couple things you could probably look at and think maybe equivalencies. Some of these fit the paradigm of aliens, actually, and like what we discussed when we were talking about gray aliens and things like that. Some, like the tall whites, kind of sound a little bit like this type of a thing. Now, again, if these are extra-dimensional creatures and they're making appearances, and they've made appearances throughout history, how would you expect them to be described? I mean, we don't do a good job describing them. But if they've been around, they've been making appearances, maybe these are extra-dimensional creatures actually showing up. I'm not saying that that's the case. I'm just saying, like, if there's something, I doubt they're physical creatures on every level. And I think mostly because the evidence is not there or is not great for them. Other than Bigfoot, there's some decent evidence there. But the rest of the stuff, it's harder to account for. One of the arguments against these creatures being real is that we should be able to find them, to find their bodies, see their bodies, more physical indications of their presence. What happens if they are actually supernatural? What happens if they are preternatural? They stand between two realms. Yeah, might be immortal. Might be something that you could not kill no matter how many rounds of ammunition you pumped into it, because they don't exist in this realm necessarily. Could be something that's been here since creation. Maybe has survived the flood because they just stepped into another dimension and then were given charge over something next. Might explain the indifference of some of these things. If they seem malicious, if they seem like they don't care about humans, or that they do care about humans insofar as taunting them or mocking them or ridiculing them or making fun of them or tricking them, that doesn't sound too distant from how angels think about human beings. We've seen angels tremendously offended by human beings. Remember when Joshua confronts, well, it might be the angel of the Lord at that stage of the game, but Joshua's like, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" The angel responds, "Neither. I don't care about you or your enemies, but as commander of the Lord's armies, I've now come." Right? So maybe angels are a little bit less concerned with us than we are concerned with us. We are not maybe the center of the cosmos. And it could be that God's created a realm invisible that we get to know of in eternity, but isn't part of our experience or our everyday experience here and now. Okay, we're out of time. I got to wrap up. What does a Christian do with all this? Very quickly, a couple things. Colossians 2:8 says something interesting. By the way, this is also in verse 20 and Galatians chapter 4, verse 9. "See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, pseudo-intellectual babble, according to the traditions and musings of mere man, following the elementary principles of this world rather than following Christ." The term elementary principles in the original language is elemental spirits of this world. And elemental spirits is often discussed in the ancient world and throughout ancient literature as meaning the same things we think of when we think of fairies. And so part of what's being said here, or what might be being said by Paul here, is like there are misleading things that are out there. And so some of this stuff might be something that you're just not supposed to chase down or think a lot of. And there are a number of scriptures that tell us like not to obsess on this stuff. I do want to mention this as well. This is important. I totally forgot about this. Haunted Cosmos has a couple episodes with the Bigfoot thing in it. And in some of those episodes, people talk about summoning Bigfoot and about how like they realize that all you have to do is psychically open yourself up to him and call to him and that he'll show up. That sounds like what we just saw with like the alien stuff where people are like, "I invite you in. Don't do that." Right? Look, I think Bigfoot's interesting. I think Dogman's interesting. There would be something very wrong if I would not be a Bigfoot hunter. I would not be the person who went out in the wilderness greatly desiring to see Bigfoot. Why? First of all, it's not achieving much for the gospel, but also I think they might be preternatural beings. They might just be demonic beings. It could be that Bigfoot or Sasquatch is actually just a Nephilim remnant as well. Fully possible that they are the byproduct of what we were called the red-haired giants in North America. 1 Timothy 4:7, we'll leave it with this. "Have nothing to do with irreverent folklore and silly myths." That's pretty straightforward. "On the other hand, discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness, keeping yourself spiritually fit." Look, there are a lot of ways to go wrong spiritually. And I think one of the things that really endangers you spiritually is if you obsess about things like cryptids, especially if it's a preternatural creature and you're throwing your effort and your energy and your interest into it. I believe that even if this realm, and by the way, C.S. Lewis fully 100% believes in the fairy realm. Like 100% absolutely believes that those things are real. Don't obsess with them. Don't chase them. Don't think that your encounters with them are very meaningful. God wanted them to remain invisible for a reason. And so the idea is if they are overseeing things in this world, that if they're nature facing, they're not for you anyway. They're overseeing something else. And so to some degree or another, as interesting as this stuff might be, don't go chasing it down. Questions, comments, rude remarks? I'm sorry I kept you guys a little bit long.
More Hartsville, Iowa, where they
Oh yeah.
just stay away from.
Anything, so the Appalachian Mountains there are, and I'm not kidding, thousands, probably tens of thousands of encounters that people have with weird stuff in the Appalachian Mountains. So if you look in the Bible and generally in biblical context, mountains are considered like spiritually thin areas where the veil is thin between the two. This is why you, in the ancient world, pagan or of God, people generally go to high places in order to make sacrifices and deal with God, or deal with spirit creatures, or try to make bargains with spirit creatures. And the older the mountains, generally the more you see that kind of stuff. The Appalachian Mountains are exceedingly old. They're the oldest mountains in North America, and they're some of the oldest mountains in the world. That's why they're covered in soil for the most part. They used to be rock cliffs, and they've just gradually built up a patina over them. But yeah, some weird stuff in the Appalachian Mountains for sure, like bizarre stuff. Mothman's kind of out at the boundary of that territory. You've got Dogman encounters in Ohio, got Sasquatch encounters in Ohio. Like Ohio is just full of it. That should be our theme for next year. Yeah.
I just want to share a story.
Yeah.
So a scoutmaster here.
Yeah.
Scoutmaster Morrow was camping with his troop at Mammoth Cave.
Yeah.
Heard those vocalizations from Bigfoot.
Yeah.
He described them just as they sounded.
Yeah.
And I said one was in Mammoth Cave and one was behind in the woods, and they were having a conversation between the two.
Yeah.
And then next morning,
Mm-hmm.
the ranger came through and asked if everybody was all right. And he goes, well, what's going on? He goes, yeah, a camp was attacked over there and it was tossed by some animal that we couldn't identify.
It does happen. Kentucky is particularly weird too. The Native Americans wouldn't go down into Kentucky, the sacred hunting ground, because they said there were wicked spirits down there, and so they would they would go into that territory, but it was just for hunting. You hunted there, and they came back. You wouldn't live there because it was very dangerous. And if you listen to like the story of the Kentucky goblins or the moon-eyed people and other stuff, there's all kinds of different cryptids from down in Kentucky too. So they got their own batch down there. Anyway, a lot of strangeness. Okay, any other questions? I would go to Bigfoot encounters or whatever else you guys experienced, but if you've had weird experiences, come talk to me interpersonally. I promise I won't tell if you ask me not to tell. But I get all kinds of weird stories from people about spiritual weird things that happen to them, and oftentimes they don't want to just vocalize those. But if you tell me, I promise I won't tell anybody else. Until you die, then I'll tell everybody. All right, let's wrap up with a word of prayer. Lord Jesus, we love you. Thank you so much for all that you've done, Father. Thank you that this world is full of mystery. And Lord, I praise you that the world to come, I cannot even imagine all the stuff you're going to crank out for us in that world to experience, all the new things that we get to encounter. Lord, keep us safe from that which is spiritually dangerous. Father, I pray for every believer in this room that you would have us in the right frame of mind, the right mindset when it comes to these things. Father, if anything is a spirit of wickedness, I pray that you keep it well away from any believer who is in this room. We love you, Lord. We thank you for the great mysteries you have hidden throughout this world, and the fact that you are revealing all things, that all things will come to light. It's in your holy name we pray. Amen. All right, guys.